This is a tutorial on how to sew a basic shield cover. This will be demonstrated for a round shield. However, you can use the same technique for pretty much any shape. If you have super sharp corners, then you may decide to take a little bit out in some certain spots, but the same general principle works for any shape. So like I said, we're doing a round today. This one is 14 inches, so it's smaller than normal for filming purposes, but it's also going to be super cute because we are making a pie shield, little cherry pie. And having the different colored fabric also helps y'all see which is the right side and which is the wrong side. So I've kind of got a little bit of an example here. When you're making a shield cover, can y'all see that? Yeah, you can. When you make a shield cover, you work with 2 pieces and some rope, and that's all you need. So the shield face is pretty simple and straightforward. It's the face of your shield. It can get a little bit complicated if you're working with anything that's like a curved shield, in which case most of the curved shields I've seen are either squares or they are still circles, in which case for the size of your piece, you'll want to measure it rather than just laying it out on your fabric. But if you're working with a flat shield like we are today, then just laying it out on your fabric and marking a line works the best. And then this other piece is just a long strip of fabric, and it's actually what we're going to tackle first. Most of what you're doing when you're making a shield has to do with this strip of fabric, and like I said, that's what we're going to do first because it's the most complicated, and then we just sew the thing together and you're done. So when you are cutting out your shield face, you see I've got a mark right here. That is the dimension of the shield, and that's what you want to mark. If you've used, commercial patterns or anything like that, they will include seam allowance, and that's typically where you mark on your fabric and where you cut. For this purpose, it is much, much easier if you mark exactly where the edge of your shield is. And that's where we're going to sew. It's going to make your life a billion times easier. As for your strip of fabric, what you really want is for it to be wide enough that it can stretch from the front of your shield, around the side, and a little bit on the back. So it's going to go from here, up here, and a little bit onto the back. You don't want it to come in really far because then that's going to interfere with your handle, especially if you're doing something like a low strap. So I usually aim for whatever this thickness is, plus maybe 3 inches. And of course, you can adjust that based on whatever size of shield you're making. So, like I said, the strip is the most complicated. So that's what we're going to start with. And I've got written on here all the steps. We hem the edges, and then along this long edge is where we're going to put our cording. I'm going to show you how to do that. So, this is my strip. It's crust colored because I thought that would be appropriate. And I just kind of winged it. This is a 5-inch wide strip. And you'll notice that on the strip and on the shield face, I've cut it with the zigzag scissors. Those are called pinking shears. And what that does is keep the fabric from fraying. This is the inside of a shield cover. I don't ever bother with anything fancy like serging or French seaming. Once it goes on the shield, it's probably never coming off until it breaks. So just doing a pinking is plenty. I've already hemmed the edges because frankly, that's the simplest thing you could do in sewing. So I don't really need to demonstrate that for y'all. But it is just a simple double fold hem that I just stitched right up. You want to hem the ends before you make your channel. If I were to make my channel, I've got a hole on this end, and then I tried to hem it, the hole's gone. So you always do your little ends first. So, as for the length of your strip, you can do it a couple different ways. You can use a circle calculator if you really don't trust yourself measuring. If you know how big your circle is, and if you're an amp guard, you're probably very familiar with how big your shield is because we get them measured all the time. So if you really do not trust yourself in measuring, you can use a circle calculator and just figure out whatever your circumference is. You will need to add a little bit of extra because as you turn and you're sewing onto a circle, this gets a little bunched up. So make sure you add a couple inches of extra. Other ways that you can do this is simply wrap your fabric around your shield if you have it. You can also just wrap a measuring tape around your shield. Or what I do most often is I just make a really, really long strip and I start sewing. And once I have it just about all the way around, then I'll go in and finish the edges. But that's a little bit more finicky. So I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner just because then you're kind of working in a really weird little corner. So, like I said, I've already hemmed my edges. So now we need to add the spot for the cord so that we can tie up our shield cover. I am using this stuff, which is very similar to paracord actually, except it's all cotton. It's similar in to paracord in that it actually has like stuff on the inside that you can pull out. If you want it to be slightly slimmer, you can actually take the insides out of this. But I find this easier to tie than paracord. Sometimes paracord can be kind of slippery and it doesn't really want to hold a knot. So I like this little cotton cording stuff. This is from Michael's. It's pretty cheap. I've had this one roll for a long time and it still has a lot on it. So this is what I'm using. You can use paracord. You can use any small rope, really. So that's what I'm using today. And you'll notice I've cut my piece quite long. It's much longer than I need to go all the way around my shield. That's for two reasons. One, if you are putting it on your shield, you're going to want a little bit of extra room because otherwise, if it's really tight when you're trying to get it onto the shield, it just becomes very difficult. The second reason is if it's really long, it's probably not ever going to come out of that channel that we make. And that's one of the worst things to try to fix. So, really long piece of cord, long piece of fabric. We are very simply going to fold over our edge and make a channel. Now, I'm going to go an extra step and fold it twice so that it looks nice and clean on the inside, but you don't have to do that. Because this is paint and it's going to be on the inside of the shield, once it's tied, you will literally never see this. So you could very easily just stitch this down and it wouldn't really matter. But for me, I am going to do a little double turn. So I'm just going to fold it over and fold it over again. And that's going to be the inside for me. Now, the little trick when you're doing this is, once you've sewn your big long channel, you've got to get this in there somehow. So this is my big trick for doing it much easier than typically. So I'm going to actually take my string and I'm going to tie a little knot just so I make sure it's probably not going to go anywhere. I might even tape it down to the table, actually, just to make sure it really doesn't go anywhere. So I'm going to take my little cord, and I'm just going to tape it down. And we're going to insert the cord while we sew the channel shut. So once I get to the end and I have the channel all sewn, the cord's already in there. And you don't have to worry about fishing it all the way around your shield. It's going to be a pain. So this is the trick to it. So like I said, I'm going to do a little extra fold just because I want to. So I'm going to get this under here. I'm going to put the cord inside of my channel. Let me kind of fiddle it into place, and then I'll show y'all where you can really see it. So my cord is right here. If you can kind of see this lump, the cord's going in right there. And I'm going to sew way over here. And the main thing you want to make sure of is that you do not go anywhere near that cord. If you hit it with your needle at any point, it will not pull through. It's going to be stuck. So you want to push it all the way to the edge where you know you're not going to touch it. And we're just going to stitch it right in to our channel. And y'all are going to have to bear with me while I stitch down the whole length of this thing, which is why we're making a small shield today, so it doesn't take up so much time. So. And you'll notice I have moved my needle over. I don't know if y'all can see it. I know it's a little far away. But I've moved my needle over so that way my presser foot, so this little guy here, is actually pushing that cord away. So I know I can't hit it because the foot's in the way. So the cord has to stay over on the edge. So. And I apologize, y'all are gonna have to bear with me while I sew down the length. And then as for the width of your channel, so long as your cord fits in it, that's really all that matters. If you aren't comfortable sewing your cord into the channel at the same time, then you may want to make your channel a little bit wider. I mean, I've made some wide because it really doesn't matter how wide it is, so long as your piece of fabric can still make it around your shield. It doesn't matter how wide it is, but the wider, the easier it's going to be to thread that cord through. And you can definitely pin this in ahead of time. It's going to make it a lot easier than what I'm doing. I didn't do that because I wanted to show y'all how you get the cord in here, as well as the original piece. But you can definitely go through and like pin this down, and you're going to have a much easier time than I am. And now that we're getting down to the end, I'm just going to sew right to this edge. Make sure to back stitch, and that's going to be the end of getting this channel in. Right. So now you can see, let me get this untaped. I have the entire cord already in this channel, and I didn't have to thread it through with a safety pin or anything else, and that can be a real pain. So that's my big trick for how to sew these is put your cord in while you sew the channel. It is so much easier. I usually will add like a knot. I mean, obviously this knot could still go through here, but definitely having a way to make sure it doesn't pass back through. One of those ways is because this cord is so long. So I'll kind of even it out a little. You can see I've got quite a lot of cord hanging out from both ends, and it may seem excessive, but this is going to ensure that I never yank this whole thing out and then have to thread it all the way back through. So we've got our crest piece, which is done, and we've got the face. This is the only thing that requires any prep. The face is done once you cut it out. Now I'm going to flip it over. And you can see it's just like I had said before. I've marked where the shield is. So if I were to lay this out on the fabric, you can see it. It's not perfect, but it lines up. That line lines up with the edge of the shield. And that's going to make sewing much simpler. If you've ever, like I said, if you've ever used a commercial pattern, they're going to include your seam allowance. So then you have to be really careful when you sew to say, oh, I need to be this far away from the edge. You can even tell where I've cut this. This seam allowance is nowhere near even, but it doesn't matter. So long as I sew on this line, I know it's going to be the right shape. I know it's going to be the right size. So I don't have to worry about how far over is my needle, how big is my seam allowance. It is completely irrelevant so long as I sew on that purple line. Now, for the crest piece or the edge, whatever you want to call it, I'm calling it a crest because it's a pie. The seam allowance on this also does not matter so long as it makes its way around your shield. However much seam allowance you sew, whether you're over here, or you wibble the whole way along, you won't even really be able to tell once you put it on the shield. So because of that, we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to put the shield face on top. Like I said, this is the one that matters. If this is off, who cares? If this is off, you're going to have it where it's not big enough on the front. So then you have a bunch of this on the face, which we don't want. Or you're going to have a bunch of this fabric pulling over the edges of your shield. And it doesn't look as nice. I mean, you could make them out of the same fabric, but for purposes of demonstrating, they're different. So we're going to do right sides together, and we're going to make sure that the shield face is on the top. So the printed side is the right side on this. On this piece, for the right side, what you want is, you can see the seam where I've sewn it. That's going to go down. And I'm going to take this edge that I haven't done anything to, and that's where I'm going to sew. So we're going to put them together like this. The shield face goes on top, and this piece goes on the bottom. Now I'm going to put it in my machine, and I'm just going to set everything down, I'm gonna put my needle right into this purple line. If y'all can see it, I'll kind of move this a little closer. Can y'all see this line in here? I don't know if you can. Um, just know that it's there.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I tried to pick a color that showed up. So this purple line is where I'm going to sew. That's where my needle's going to go. I'm going to be essentially sewing a straight line on the bottom, and as I go, I'm going to stop. Because you see, it kind of pulls away because the top's a circle. So as I go, I'm going to stop and kind of smush it over and make it into a circle. But you'll see. So let's just kind of get started here. As I'm sewing, I start to get where this kind of veers off. I'm just going to pull it over and line it back up in the front of my needle and keep going. Now, I'm not concerned if, the seam allowance is always the same on this, if it kind of, goes off to the side, so long as it's still being caught with enough seam allowance, that's fine. This is the part where you need to be precise. So this is the part you put on top, and you make sure just to follow that line the whole way. You'll notice that this is taking a lot of stopping and kind of scooching the fabric. If you notice a lot of puckering like this, it can help to pick up your presser foot and just kind of smooth stuff out. And it just makes it a lot easier to sew. If any of you have ever tried applique, this is very similar in that if you're doing a circle or any kind of curve, you can't really go in one go. You need to take your time, stop, and make sure that it's nice and flat. It's going to avoid puckers, which, it's a shield, so a lot of us probably don't care that much about puckers, but it's also going to keep you from just completely missing one piece of your fabric, which is possible, and then you're going to have a big hole, and it's going to rip. And we already put our shields through enough torture. They probably shouldn't start off with holes in them.
Would you recommend doing it just freehand like that, or pinning or clips would be suggested, or is it just preferential?
It's definitely preferential. For me, I prefer definitely to do it freehand. And my reasoning is simply because if I pin this, you'll notice that the brown fabric can and the round and the pattern fabric, they can kind of get bunched up, especially if you're new to it and you're working on a circle. Um, as you're sewing in the round, they will get bunched up, and then your pins will actually keep the fabric in the wrong spot, if that makes sense. I'm kind of having to scrunch up certain parts and make sure that it's all staying flat. If I had pinned this, it was going to be a pain. And also, because if I pinned it, then my fabric is going to be all kind of like this over here. And I find it a lot easier if this is just straight, because then my sewing, even though I'm sewing a circle, I'm actually sewing straight. So it is definitely personal preference. You can pin it if you like, but this is just how I like to do it. It makes it easier for me to follow the line if I don't have pins in the way. So. And while you're doing this, you also want to occasionally flip up and make sure that this is still flat. One thing that we've definitely all learned if we've sewn before is that the worst thing could be that this gets folded up underneath and gets stuck and then gets sewn through. So definitely every now and then just kind of make sure it's staying flat. It's not as much of a problem if you have the small piece on the bottom, but it is still something to look out for. And you see, like I just had a big old folded piece that was gonna turn out all kinds of crazy. So definitely check as you go. Okay, so now that we're getting around to where we started, first I'm gonna clip the threads where I started. Just kind of, it's easier to do while there's less stuff in the way. So I like to do it now. Sorry for hitting the camera. You'll also notice that this is a little long. You know, if I kind of push it around here, it's going to overlap by about an inch and a half. I don't find that to be an issue. I would rather it be long than short because if it's long, I know that I've gotten all the edge covered. If it's too short, you're going to have to add more, which is kind of a pain. So I prefer it just a little bit long, but not too long. And when we tie this, it's going to bunch up anyway. So you won't even really know. So we're going to get this all flipped back underneath. And we're just going to make sure it all lines up. And we're just going to keep going right over top of what we already did. Right. And I'm kind of trying to just keep my needle right where I already sewed. If it's a little bit off, it's no big deal at all. But if you can keep it right about where you've already sewn, then that's ideal. So here we go. Do a little back stitch, and we are done. And believe it or not, we are completely done with this shield cover. I'm gonna push this out of the way. Um, so like I said, you can see my seam allowance on this is definitely not even. You can really see, I mean, look right here. I really did not get it even. This is very narrow. This is quite wide. You will not really be able to tell at all once I get this on the shield. So long as I've sewn on this line, I don't care if this is a little wonky. Um, Now, these seam allowances are quite wide. You can trim them down more if you prefer. For me, since all I've done is pink these edges, that does help with it not fraying, but it's not, foolproof. It can fray with everything that we do with these shields, everything we put them through. So I just tend to kind of leave them a little long. It doesn't really affect anything. I mean, some people might say it adds more weight, not even an ounce. So, as for putting it on your shield, y'all know how this goes. I just kind of will sit it down and pull this up around. And you can see it's a lot easier. Can you imagine trying to get that rope in that channel? after we've already sewn it. And you can see where these overlap a little bit. No big deal. And we're just going to tighten this down. And I'll usually like tie it off. And if this had a handle in it, what I will usually do is tie it off and then tie it to the shield handle, just for a little bit of added security. But just tie yourself a nice little bow and pull your loops out really far if you're tying it in a bow like this, just so that you don't risk it coming undone. And it also shortens everything. So make your bow really big. Just shove it down in there. And we have a perfect tie shield. And you can see, because we sewed right along that line, it's pretty dang well just on right on the edges. Over here, it's a little janky. And that's just a me thing because I haven't really evened it out on the cover. But for the most part, it's right along that line because we followed it. So there is your shield cover.